song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name.
Church, we're going to sing this hymn this morning. I know it's not something we do very often, but this hymn is an old hymn about being built on the solid foundation of Jesus and building our lives on that. That our hope is built on Him, that our lives are built on Him. And you're going to find that as a theme throughout this morning. So I hope you'll sing with us. Again, it's a little different for us, but sometimes I think it's good to sort of go back to some of these old songs and listen to the truth that's in them. Let's sing this. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and His righteousness. Come on. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. Darkness seems to hide His face, I rest on His unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. His oath, His covenant, His blood support me in the whelming flood. When all around my soul gives way, He then is all my hope and stay. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. He shall come with trumpet sound. Oh, may I then in Him be found, dressed in His righteousness alone, faultless and standing for His throne. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand.
Good morning, United. We are so looking forward to filling this space and having you join us here at Grand Point Church in Chambersburg once again. But until then, we are excited about sharing a worship experience with you once again in your own homes. And we will continue this for the long haul to make it available for you wherever you are right now. There's still a lot of ways that you can be involved in your worship experience right now, including giving online through the links provided below. We also have a Bible study plan that we're making available to you, a reading plan to continue your personal devotion during this season. And also there are some volunteer opportunities that we want to provide to you. If you'd like to learn more about those, make sure you're connected with our Grand Point United Facebook and Instagram accounts. Call the front office if you have any questions, and we will direct those to the right people so that you can be a part of all that's happening here at Grand Point Church. Happy Father's Day, and thanks for being with us.
Hey, happy Father's Day to all of you dads out there. Man, you have such an incredible role in the future of your family, in the future of the church, in the future of our nation as you raise up the next generation, whether it be biological kids or spiritual kids. So thank you so much for everything that you do, and happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day to you.
Happy Father's Day to you.
Happy Father's Day to you. Happy Father's Day to you.
Happy Father's Day to you.
Happy Father's Day to me.
Well, as I think about the topic that we're going to be talking about today, I'm reminded of something that I experienced when I was in college. I was on the chorale, which was this traveling chorus that was part of the school. We basically, at the end of the school year, would go on tour, and we'd travel all over the nation, singing concerts at churches, in schools, and all these other things, just to be able to kind of be a bit of a ministry, because almost all of our music actually was based off of Christianity and worship and all of these things. So it was really cool to be able to be a part of that. Well, the only way that you can get that to work when you have 30 or 40 college-age kids traveling in a bus across the country and a very small budget is to rely on other people to be able to let you stay in their homes. So every place where we stopped, we would have these host families that would take us in, give us a place to stay for the night, and then they would also give us some food and whatnot. And it was interesting because we had some amazingly cool experiences getting to know different families and getting to experience like different ways that people were living across the country and all of these different aspects of that. And it was cool because we got to stay in all kinds of different places. We got to stay in a mansion once, which was really ridiculous. I've never been around a house that is that expensive before. We got to stay in a condo once because they had this extra condo, the family that was keeping us, and we actually got a condo all to ourselves for a few days. One time we stayed in just a really nice in-law suite and got our own space there. But most of the time, you just stayed in an average home, slept on plenty of basement floors. Sometimes we stayed at church camps, different things like that. Well, there was one place that we stayed that really sticks in my mind because it was a very interesting house to stay in. We got there, and immediately it was obvious that something was up because the entire back of the house had no wall. In fact, there was just a big plastic sheet hung up that was keeping the inside from being the outside and vice versa. This house was probably in the simplest of terms under construction. There was a giant hole in the backyard, and it was obvious something was going on. And as we got to talk to the family, we began to understand exactly what was happening. Some of this was actually evidenced when you walked through this house, like the staircase that looked like it kind of belonged in a fun house at a carnival because it twisted and turned as it went up. We had the wonderful creaking sound at night when the wind blew, which made it sound like the entire house might fall down. And my favorite was this one hallway that just gradually got smaller as you looked down it. In fact, the one side of the hallway where the door was significantly smaller than the other side. Because over the years, this hallway had been repaired and repaired and repaired, and through all these repairs, they just kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. See, the real issue of this house was whoever had owned the house prior to this family and built the house didn't put in a good foundation. The foundation of the house was actually falling apart and rotting away. And so the reason why the construction was happening and all of this stuff was occurring was because they were repairing the foundation. See, the foundation of the house being off meant that everything that was built on top was falling apart. This is exactly true for our lives. See, when the center of our lives, our foundation, is not in a good place, it means that our lives oftentimes are not in a good place. The starting point of where we build who we are, of how we live our lives, has a huge impact on every single aspect of our lives. Not only that, but whatever we do end up building on a foundation, even if it is a good foundation, can be incredibly important as well. Because even if you have a great foundation that is strong, if the house is never attached to the foundation correctly, it could still fall apart and fall down. It can be amazingly detrimental even in that situation. Well, today, we are going to be looking at some foundational issues. We're going to be looking at some things that are going to help us understand some of the roots to conflict and division in our lives. And they're all started by looking at where our foundations are. We are in this series called Conflict Resolution, where we are walking through the book of 1 Corinthians, and we are beginning to look at where sources of division and sources of conflict rise up in our lives. And we're going to be looking at our role as believers in being the solution to conflict and to division. So far, we've talked about how our self-centeredness tends to be a huge driver when it comes to conflict and division in our lives. We also talked about last week how the transformation of the Holy Spirit can help us overcome those self-centered issues, overcome the sin that leads to self-centeredness, and help us become more than human, to become part of the solution to division and conflict instead of being somebody that fuels those issues. Well, today, we're going to be taking a deeper look at the things that we build our lives on. We're going to be looking at where our foundations are, and how a life developed on the wrong foundation often is what brings unnecessary conflict and unnecessary divide between people. We're also going to be looking at how we build on a good foundation and how that can impact our lives as well. I remember in the early days of football for me, where I started playing in elementary school, we were being taught really early on the importance of a good stance. In fact, this was something true that happened all throughout my years of playing football through elementary school, middle school, junior high, into high school. The importance of your stance is so crucial to how you play football. A bad stance can make it really hard for you to change direction. It makes it hard for you to get off the ball quickly whenever the ball is snapped. And it's really easy to knock somebody over who has a bad stance, a bad foundation. I remember drills where the coach would just walk around and give light taps to players and knock them into the dirt, and they'd come up with clods of grass and dirt hanging off their face mask because their stance was not very good. And because their stance was bad, almost everything that came after that suffered. See, the stance is a player's foundation, and a bad stance often leads to poor performance of that player. Well, in our lives, our foundation is also just as important, and everything that we build on in our lives is affected by that foundation. When we rely on foundations that are centered in the world, when we rely on money, when we rely on material things, when we rely on our human relationships, when that's where we find our foundation, when things start to get challenging in our lives, everything that we have built in our lives ends up shaken because our foundation is in a bad place. And oftentimes, all of these things will come crashing down around us and collapse because our foundation is off. When our foundation is in God, however, when our foundation is in Jesus, then everything that comes after it should be colored by that foundation. And even if everything falls away, the thing at the very core of who we are is still stronger than any of the challenges that we may be facing. When it comes to conflict and division, then, that comes up in our lives, our foundation also impacts our ability and the way in which we work through conflict and division. A poor foundation in our lives, oftentimes fuels conflict and division rather than helping us navigate it and helping us become part of that solution. Well, right now, I think that many of us are feeling the force of conflict and division in our world. I think some of this is the side effect of our slower pace of life that has had to happen because of our quarantine. Because of this, we are all so much more attentive to what's going on in the never-ending news cycle that's in and out. And so I think we are beginning to be more aware of some of the conflict that has actually been under the surface for quite some time. And especially in our world, in our country, there is this thing that feels so much more all-encompassing than maybe it has before. The reality is that tension and that division and that conflict has actually been there, but we just have not been aware of that. I think that some of this tension and some of this conflict and some of the divide that we are feeling right now is so crucial for us to work through. It is so incredibly important for us to face this because as believers, we need to learn to face these divisions, to face these conflicts, and find a way to make sure that we are in line with God's heart on this. We need to ask the question, what foundation is our lives built on, and is that foundation at play whenever we are choosing to ignore some of the division that's happening, when we are choosing to not deal with some of these tensions and these issues that are going on within our nation? I think this is a season that is meant to be a call to action for the church. This is meant to be a time for God's people to step up and to show the world what the love of God truly is. This is a time for God's people to seek to reconcile with one another. This is a time for God's people to be able to show God's love to all people, no matter what race, no matter what other divisions that we have placed in people's lives. This is our opportunity to recognize people who are being marginalized and to step up and to face injustice. And if we look at where our foundations lie, our foundations should drive us towards that if we have a relationship with Jesus. We should be trying to help the world find a relationship with Jesus. And our foundation of a relationship with Him should impact everything that we do in our lives. And it should drive us to seek to find peace and love and hope in every situation that we are in. This has to begin, though, with us examining not only our foundations, but it also has to take us to a place where we examine the things that we have built upon the foundation that we have, to look and see, are these in line with what God wants for our lives? I think there are so many of us that when we break it down, the things that we believe and the things that we live out with our lives don't actually line up with the foundation that we claim to have. Oftentimes, they're completely apart from the foundation that should be in God. Or sometimes we have that foundation and we're just building in the wrong direction. We're building in the wrong way. We're not in line with what God wants for us. I think this encompasses everything in our lives, by the way. This encompasses our relationships. This encompasses the way we do our jobs, the way we spend our money, the way we raise our kids, the way that we do school, if you're still in school, the way that we do life. All of these things are either going to be built on a foundation that is focused on a relationship with God, or they're not. Let's take a look at what the Apostle Paul has to say about all of this, because as we talk about conflict and we talk about division, we need to get to the root of the things that often cause these things in our lives. And a poor foundation can be just that. We're going to be in chapter 3 of 1 Corinthians here today. But let me remind you a little bit of where we are so that if you haven't been following us, you can be up to speed with where we are. And then also just to remind us of the context of what we are reading. So 1 Corinthians was written to the church in the city of Corinth, and the city of Corinth had a reputation for being a city that was good at pushing the boundaries of debauchery. They were a city that was good at pushing the limits of what is wrong and what is right, and that whole circle of influence. It was very synonymous to what we would probably associate Las Vegas to today. Well, this city had its reputation, and the church in Corinth was beginning to adopt some of the practices of the world around it, which were not in line with the way in which God would want them to live their lives. So Paul writes the letter to the church in Corinth to address some conflict and division that was rising up within the church, and to also address this issue that they were living outside of the way in which God had designed them to live. In this, one of the most obvious issues they were dealing with was this tension between different leaders within the church. Some people were saying, we follow Apollos, which was one of the people leading the church there. Some of them were saying, no, we follow Paul. Others were following other leaders, and they were creating divide and conflict amongst the church, which was all actually just a symptom of the bigger issues that were underlying everything that they were dealing with. Well, today we're going to pick things up in verse 5 of chapter 3 as we address some issues of foundation and this issue of conflict that was rising up in the church. So in verse 5, Paul says, "What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you believed as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers, and you are God's field, God's building." What Paul is doing here is he is challenging the thinking of the church. See, what he's saying is, look, we are one team. We are all on the same team. You guys have been creating this competition and this division, but we are all working towards the same goal. See, what you're doing is you are taking these different roles that we have played in your growth and in your development, and you're starting to put them against each other. You're starting to make them compete with one another. But they are actually just different parts of the same process. And ultimately, that process is being run by God's hands. It is God who is providing the growth, not us. We do this sort of thing all the time in our individual lives. Sometimes it does have to do with leaders that we lift up, but we oftentimes do this just in the way in which we live our lives. Instead of looking at how every part of our lives is actually pointed in the same direction, we compartmentalize. We take different parts of our lives and we separate them, and we think that that's going to be okay. We put our faith and we put God over here. We put our work life over here. We put our money over here. We put our sex life over here. We put our home life over here. And we put our friends over there. And we think then that's going to be okay. But what ends up happening is all of these things that we are dividing and we're living in these compartmentalized worlds just end up in conflict and division because we are actually dividing ourselves instead of pointing everything in the same direction. In truth, God and faith should instead be the foundation upon which every other piece is built on. When we build our lives on that same foundation, when everything points in the same direction, that's when we find true growth, that's when we find true maturity, and that's when we really find life. And that's where we also find the way to heal through conflict and division in our lives. Paul goes on to explain this a bit further in verse 10. He says, "According to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation, and someone else is building upon it. Let each one of you take care how he builds upon it. For no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ." The foundation of is a relationship with Jesus. And that foundation should be what we build everything on. When we allow something else to take his place, and that becomes our foundation, that's when we end up in a complete mess. That's when we end up hurting the people around us. That's when we end up chasing things that have little long-term importance, and we chase things that are never going to bring fulfillment. That's when we chase things like money. That's when we chase material things. That's when we end up living in a world full of broken relationships. Our foundation is so crucial to living out a relationship with Jesus. But it also isn't the only thing. The things that we build on top of a good foundation matter just as much. Let's take a look at where Paul takes this in verse 12. He says, "Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, or straw, each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire. The fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work that anyone has built on this foundation survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burnt up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire." What Paul is saying here is the way that you live your life matters. He's saying when the day comes and your entire life is laid out before God, the way in which you live your life actually matters. Some of us who have a relationship with Jesus have been building on the foundation of that relationship with things like wood and hay and straw. We've been chasing our own self-centeredness, the me-focused way of doing things. And in the end, all of that will be burned away. We've built our lives chasing comfort instead of chasing the work of Jesus. So many of us have also done things that are incredibly good. We have served, we have chased these sort of things, but we did so with cheap building materials. We did so because our hearts were about furthering ourselves instead of furthering the work of Jesus. See, it's the thing behind the thing that matters in this. It's the heart behind what we're doing that matters. Look, this is really important for us to be able to unpack. This is important for us to understand. And if you don't hear me say anything else today, I want you to hear this next bit of what I'm about to say. Because notice what this passage is talking about. This passage is talking about people who have been saved, people whose foundation is already in Jesus. Look at verse 15 again. It says, if anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. The question that so many of us ask is, how far can I take it and still go to heaven? How far can I go and still be okay? One of the number one questions that I used to get from teenage boys, especially when I was a youth pastor, was, how far can I go with a girl and still go to heaven? How far can I take this thing? See, at its root, this is a misunderstanding of what the nature of a relationship with Jesus actually is. Because it's not about what we do, it's about what he has already done. With his death on the cross, Jesus has made us forgiven. He has already saved us whenever we choose to follow him. It's not about being a good person. But if we are all honest with ourselves, oftentimes the way we live our life asks that same question over and over again. How far can I go and still be okay? How long can I choose material things in this world and still go to heaven? How honest do I need to be on my tax return and still go to heaven? How many times can I ignore that person in need that I can help and still go to heaven? How long can I ignore the injustice that is happening around me and still go to heaven? This is what it means to build with wood and hay and straw, the stuff that's going to get burnt up in the fire. This thinking leaves everything that we build in our lives completely burned up. It leads to loss. We're still being saved, but when everything is laid out before God, when we're stripped back to just the things that we built with in our lives, if these things were the center of it all, then we're going to be pretty lacking. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to find myself in that place. We are saved by faith, by Jesus, not what we do, but what we do matters. The way we live our lives matter. The way we love people matter. The way that we do the work of Jesus matters. So how are you living out the mission of Jesus? How are you doing the work of Jesus with your everyday life? How are you living your life? Does it all point to Jesus? You know, it's funny, as a pastor, and actually pretty much in every position I have held as a person who works in the church, I have been asked this question so many times. Aren't you the one who is supposed to be doing the things in ministry? You talk a lot about stepping up, you talk a lot about serving, but isn't that why you're paid to do what you do? The short answer is no, it's not. In fact, the truth is, our role as pastors and staff members and all of these things are to help you be equipped to do the work of Jesus. It's our job to help you take your next step so that you're helping other people take your next step. We want to help you live out the thing that you are called to do. See, God is not really all that interested in what I do on your behalf when it comes to living out this work of Jesus. He wants you to do it in your life. In this context, it's funny because I think this is where we want to be found guilty by association, right? We want to be found to be in the right place because the people that we're following are in the right place. But in truth, this is on us. I think about this in my relationship with my kids and my wife, right? When my daughters are doing well, they're behaving in public, when they have great manners, when they step up and do these things that are incredibly sweet and just incredible in general, I would love to be able to take credit for every little bit that they're doing. Because my wife and I are partnered in raising them, right? The thing is, if I'm completely honest though, my wife has had a huge role in how our kids are turning out. She has been with them and worked through them in so many different ways. Now, I've had a big role in their lives as well, but so many of the seeds that people tend to see in their lives have come from her, and it's not right for me to take credit for that. In fact, if it were up to me, the kids would probably be a lot more messed up than they actually are. I mean, you have to look at even small things, right? My policy on tattling is snitches get stitches, right? That's the as soon as they come saying, my sister did this, that's what I say. Snitches get stitches. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to deal with the tattling. Can you imagine that played out in those kids' lives? They're going to end up messed up if that's the only influence they have. I can't take credit for the things that my wife has done in raising them, just the same as she can't take credit for the role that I've had in their lives. Now, we are partnered, we are moving in the same direction, but we have had different responsibilities and different roles in raising those kids. We are all in that same place when it comes to doing the work of Jesus. In every single part of our lives, we should be serving and doing the work of Jesus and not trying to rely on what the collective and what everyone else around us is doing. We need to show other people what it means to have a relationship with Jesus and the gifts and the passions and all of the things that we have in our lives. That's what it means to build well on a good foundation. See, it's the diversity of God's people that accomplish his mission. It's our different gifts, it's our different passions, it's our different backgrounds, it's our different cultures, it's our different upbringings, it's our different races that all make up this incredible tapestry that is God's church, that is Jesus' church. And it means that every single one of us needs to step up, and we need to join together and do our part within what God has gifted us with to be able to serve, to be able to build well on the foundation that is Jesus. Our foundation is crucial. Jesus and our relationship with him needs to be the center of our worlds, the center of our foundation. But what we build on matters. And this is all evident in the way in which we live our lives. So what are some ways that we can work towards making sure our foundation is centered on him and then also building well? Well, first, don't compartmentalize your life. Don't allow yourself to split up the different circles of your life into different places. Allow everything to be on the foundation of a relationship with Jesus, no matter what that means. Don't allow yourself to be a different person at work or a different person with your friends or a different person at home than you are whenever you are found in church. Allow yourself to be built on the foundation that is Jesus. Build everything off of that. And then step up and get to work. Step up and do the work of Jesus. Step up and serve. This season has given us some incredible new opportunities to be able to reach people for Jesus, to be able to even serve and help other people experience a relationship with him. We now have our online venues that are firing on all cylinders, and we aren't going to be stopping that, which means we have a greater need. We need people who can be connections people that can help people man our chats. People that can make sure that people are still being connected to the church. We need more people to do that. We need production people. We need people that are willing to help us make sure that we are doing everything that we can to help reach more people for Jesus. Because our online venue is going to be an opportunity to reach even more people than we've been able to in the past, because there are going to be people that may never walk through the doors of our physical building that can still be a part of God's kingdom and a part of Grand Point Church. So get involved, serve, step up. There's tons of places throughout our community as well where you can be the hands and feet of Jesus and you can build well on the foundation of a relationship with him. As we wrap things up here today, I want to plant a picture in your mind's eye. Imagine what this next season of the church can look like. Imagine the lives that could be transformed by what God is doing through Grand Point Church, through our online venues, through our dedication to helping people take their next steps in a relationship with Jesus. Imagine what these things could look like if every single one of us was connected and serving in some way. Imagine what would happen if every person that calls Grand Point Church home stepped up and engaged people where they were and showed people the love of Jesus. Imagine the change that could happen in the world. Imagine what Chambersburg could look like. Imagine what Pennsylvania could look like. Imagine what the United States could look like. Imagine how the world could change if God's people stepped up and built well on that foundation of a relationship with Jesus. Imagine how lives could be transformed for God's kingdom. Let's move towards that goal. Let's build well on the foundation of Jesus. Well, thank you so much again for joining us today. It's been so cool getting to worship with you. If you would like to serve in United, if you would like to be involved in what we're doing, like I said, we need people on our production team. We need people on our connections team. We need some people to help clean the building now that we're in this new world where we have to be a little more careful about some of the stuff that's going around. If you are interested in any of that, please email the church. It's office@grandpoint.church. You can also get the phone number from grandpoint.church, our website, if you want to call the church instead. We really would love to help you guys engage in a place where you can help other people experience a relationship with Jesus. Make sure you're checking out our reading plan that we have that we are going to be working through this summer as United. It's going to be walking through this entire book of 1 Corinthians. So check that out. There's a link in the video description here. Also, make sure that you are checking out our social media stuff. We've got Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We are going to be communicating through that our plans for regathering, because on the 5th of July, we are back together, regathered. We are still going to have online services for the sake of people who aren't able to be here at the building. They are not going to be lacking in anything that we're doing, but we are also going to, on the 5th, be able to be together as one unified church here at Chambersburg, because the sanctuary services and the United services will be worshiping together that morning. And then on the 12th, we'll be back here together for our new service time, our single service in United at 9 o'clock that morning. Thank you so much again for joining us for worship. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.